What's up, guys? So in this tutorial, I'm going to go over a little bit of a different style of pluck. This is based off of EDX's plucks. His plucks are a little bit more sharp and aggressive, I would say, but he has a very beautiful style of pluck. To be honest, this sound gave me a lot of trouble. It was a lot more difficult than I expected it to be. I didn't get as close as I wanted to. Just the extent of where my ears are at and my production ability at the moment, I wasn't able to get the exact sound, but I still think I have a few concepts that will be very helpful if you're trying to get close to this style of pluck, and some concepts that will help you in shaping a sound in this way. So I'll play you his version first. This is from the song Elements, originally by Dinka. This is his remix. I think this is one of the most beautiful house songs ever made. So this is his version. And this is where I got to. So close, but not as sharp, I would say. But the concepts are there. So I will go through how I created this. So I broke it out into the bass notes and the higher notes again. If you would like to know the notes, these are the bass notes. And these are the higher notes. And then later on in the progression, there's also this higher line that comes in. These are the notes for that. And then also in this section, it sounded like there was a pad or something lower in between. I just added the bass notes with the higher notes and just made a super saw filtered down to kind of fill in the space. But for this bass patch, here is how I created it in Serum. So I started with two oscillators. The first oscillator, a saw wave. This is just a saw wave based sound. That's how it sounded to me. I started off with one voice, but that didn't have the proper character to the sound. One voice was just too uniform. It didn't have the right personality, I guess character you would call it. So this first oscillator, a saw wave, 3 voices, but the reason it sounded like one voice to me is because it's very, very narrow, very uniform. So that's why the detune is all the way down almost, or I guess in this patch it is all the way down. And then I layered a sine wave underneath, an octave below, to carry that sub information, the fundamental of the entire sound. So I will play that without the effects on, without the modulations on. And this is what it sounds like. So I added some hyper dimension to widen the sound a little bit. I just had the size all the way down and the mix at 39%. And then I used envelope on the filter cutoff with this envelope 2. The basis of this sound is really going to be dependent on your envelopes in the filters and how sharp they are, how much the envelope goes up in the frequency range. That was really tough to dial in. And as well as having this envelope 2 on the cutoff, I used amp modulation with the envelope 2. The reason the level on the saw oscillator is a little bit higher is because I wanted that to be more audible. So if this was turned down a little bit, as this is in the sine wave, it wouldn't be as audible. The pluck would be shorter and it would cut off the sound in a shorter fashion. But the sine wave in the patch felt like it needed to be a shorter note. This sound is very plucky, so I didn't want the sine wave to carry on and drone on throughout the patch. And that's the reason why this is more, this is lower and this is higher. So this can carry more of the audible character of the sound. And then compression is also going to be a very important tool in this kind of patch. What this is doing is making that very short instant part of the pluck sharper. So it's letting the signal come through at the very start, and then the compressor is clamping down to emphasize that attack. So the attack is open a little bit, 15 milliseconds, relatively quick release. Ratio is not too intense because I didn't want this bass patch to be super sharp and super plucky. But if you hear it without the compressor, the compressor adds a little bit of sharpness, a little bit of control. It's like a little bit of definition. It's like if you imagine an image that is just a plain image and then you give it an outline, a little bit of definition around it so it's more noticeable. And then just some reverb to kind of fill out the space. So that is the bass patch. The higher notes. So it was 2 oscillators again. The first oscillator, saw wave, again with a narrow detune, and then the next oscillator is an octave up. It sounded like the original patch had another octave above to give it a little bit of brightness and a little bit of a further frequency response. So if I take off all of the modulations and effects, this is what it sounds like. Really buzzy and annoying. Put the filter on again. And again, this filter modulation is going to be very finicky, very hard to dial in to get the exact sound. You're going to have to try different polarities of the low pass filter, and then adjust how much the envelope is actually affecting this cutoff. I also did amp modulation on this as well. The first oscillator, which is the meat of the sound, again, the level is higher, so it's more audible. This higher octave is a little bit more closed off with the level pushed down a bit. And then I tried some things with the noise oscillator. Didn't really work out. This macro is mapped to things, but it's just pushing the level a little bit. So if you look at where the cutoff is, it's actually starting a little bit higher than where this cutoff is actually showing. And then for this sound, I wanted the pluck to be emphasized in the attack a little bit more than the bass patch. So that is why the ratio is a little bit more intense. The attack and release are pretty much the same, but here's what it sounds like without the compressor. And the compressor gives it a little bit of a sharper attack to really emphasize the pluckiness of the sound. And then I added a little bit of distortion just to glue those 2 oscillators together and give it a little bit of a crunch. It's very subtle. So those 2 patches together and we get this. So for this bass patch, I just controlled the bass a little bit with this EQ. And then I referenced the side information using the span trick that I talked about in the last tutorial I made. But just referencing the side information, it looked like the bass needed to be controlled a little bit and cut off with this side EQ. Same thing with the higher patch. Did some EQ, just try to emphasize certain frequencies that would match the reference. And again, with a side cut. I also, on this high patch, I added this Haas effect delay. Basically, it's just a fully wet delay, a little bit of a push on the milliseconds for one of the sides. So that makes it sound like one of the sides is hitting your ears before the other, and that's what gives the illusion that it's very wide. And then this EQ is just controlling the fundamentals a little bit of this sound because it is a detuned saw. So those fundamental harmonics are going to be up and down a level depending on which note is hit and where the phase of each wave table is at. So this dynamic EQ just controls those fundamentals and tries to give it a little bit of a more uniform relative volume. It's subtle, but it does make it a little bit more uniform in the entire patch. Now, the second thing that was very important for pluck sounds in general is to limit after the fact. I first saw this when I watched deadmau5 producing with his pluck sounds, and I saw that he was limiting like really heavily on the pluck sounds because when you are modulating plucks with compression and just the pluck envelopes, it's gonna create a very sharp attack, but you want to control that with a limiter. So the relative volumes are controlled and kind of the same level. So if I play that, and same thing on the higher oscillator. And the reason I did this on each individual channel is because these are grouped, but if I just limited on the group channel, this limiter is going to have to do a lot of work to limit those peaks of the sound, and it's not going to be as clean as if you limit in stages. And this is something that I see like Skrillex doing on his tracks overall. He limits in stages, so the final master limiter does not have to do as much work, and that just allows you to have a louder, cleaner sound at the end of everything. So on this group channel, this utility is just turning the gain down so I can have a little bit of headroom for more compression. This compression is just controlling the sound a little bit more. Not too much, it's just kind of gluing those sounds together. And then a little bit of delay, that's what it sounded like was in the original. Subtle, and then some reverb to fill out the space. These settings, I think the only thing that I could really touch on here is that I mess with this attack knob as well as the early and late to kind of get the correct sound, and then the EQs to place it in the right frequency spectrum. And then I did a little bit more of side EQ, and then here's the final limiter. Let me first play those together. So now those are glued together, and you can trust that the levels are going to be uniform. And because of that, it's going to have a more consistent, powerful musical taste throughout. So yeah, that is pretty much the sound. This patch for these higher notes is the same as this higher patch. And yeah, so those all together. And then with the lower pad. So if I resample this, you'll see that the waveform kind of resembles this. And that's how I kind of recreate sounds, is I look at the waveform and a limiter and just make sure that my waveform is looking consistent to what the original looked like. So if I resample it, so that's how you can see if your pluck is too sharp or too long. You want it to look similar to this, and then you can reference as you go to try to get the correct sound that also has the correct level and the correct shape. So I just pulled over this like intro beat from the song. If I turn on this little LFO shaper, you will see that the song and the sound that I've created turns into kind of a little tune. It would help if I unsolo that. So yeah, fairly close, not as close as the original. EDX is a very good producer, pretty underrated, I would say. So yeah, I think the major things to incorporate into your knowledge of producing for this type of sound is that you want to make sure you're thinking about the levels of each oscillator and how you're modulating the amp with the envelope, and as well as the cutoff with the envelope. And then compression, if you set your attack a little bit forward, that'll allow the very first portion of the transient to pop through, which will emphasize the plucky nature of the sound. And then you just layer it with your higher layer. Same thing, maybe if your higher layer has a sharper ratio, which will emphasize the pluck even more. And then, yeah, after that, it's just some effects, maybe some more compression to glue it together, side EQ to match whatever you're trying to match. And then the limiters on each are very important. You want to limit in stages, I would say, and then limit finally again, so everything is very controlled. And that is how you get this type of pluck sound. Yes, so it's a little bit of a different pluck sound to like a dead mouse pluck sound, but I feel like, well, I hope that these concepts could be incorporated into your own productions. It's something I want to explore more. I want to try this again, maybe in a few months or a year from now, to see if I can get closer. But yeah, I hope this helped. I'm going to be making some more sounds, probably moving into more Skrillex sounds. I want to do some more Porter Robinson style sounds as well. But if this helped, if you'd like me to continue to do this, please throw a subscribe my way if you would care to do so. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you.